Hello, 499 TESOL people. I know it's another exciting video for me, but this one's current. I'm right here right now, Tuesday night, a little late because I meant to put all this up on Sunday night and Monday. The handout that's in this week's lesson goes over several, and there's 3 pages, several types of ESL programs. All right, and you will have yours in color. The first page is the most important one. I've got these organized so that I have a description of the program, the students that are served, the grades served, in other words, what grade level, entry level grade when they start, language goals, years of student participation, a rough estimate, and teacher qualifications. Now, all of these are kind of iffy. I can tell you right now, one thing that is very important, and I just thought I wish I'd put on here, but it's crowded enough, is that anytime you look at these different types of programs, you have to look at your school and what resources do you have. You can't go on the last page and talk about having a one-way or a two-way dual language program if you don't have a large number of teachers that are bilingual, can teach in either Spanish or English. And the problem with dual or bilingual schools is that they're basically Spanish and English. And now we've got enough refugees that we might end up with another group actually being more than the Spanish speaking. But you're not going to find dual language with Arabic speakers abundant in your community. So dual language is pretty much a Spanish-English option. There is one dual language school or bilingual school. And the distinction, I'm not going to bother with that right now. It's not worth it really in our context. But bilingual emphasizes equal achievement in both languages. Dual language, you want to emphasize the second language so that everybody, generally speaking, dual language, my opinion is that you're going to emphasize that English proficiency, but also not only knowledge of the second culture, but also a fairly high degree of fluency in that second language. I'm a big proponent of both of those types of programs, but they take it takes huge amount of resources, money, and determination. So we're going to pretty much play on just the first page and a little bit on the second page, or the second page. And those 5 programs are ESL Pullout, ESL Pushin, ESL Class Period, Sheltered Instruction, which is what your textbook is about, and which SIOP is about, which Sheltered Instructional Observational Protocol. I'll talk about that, and if you've had the 328, that's the book we used. In the second page we got, and the last one is newcomer programs, which sometimes if you're in a situation with a large number of kids that have especially no cultural background and no language skills or almost nothing in English, if we're talking English. Remember, this stuff can all be applied if we were in Japan and we wanted to try these programs, if they allow these programs in Japan. Okay, so these first 5 are really the ones that you'll have to work with. I mentioned that resources, I didn't have a qualification across here, but resources are pretty much limited in the first 2 pages. So that's almost all of you will always work with one of these type programs. And the original ESL program that impacted Nebraska is the Pullout. And of course, I'm talking about Nebraska because we're in Nebraska, but this is true in most states, although it might be different in East or West Coast. Excuse me. I don't think I ever sneezed online before. I hope you covered, I didn't cover my mouth. I hope I don't. Okay, ESL Pullout. This is the simplest program. It's not a very good one, but it's what schools use when they have a limited ESL teacher pool, maybe only one person that may not even be qualified, but people say you're a certain teacher and we think it, since you teach French or Spanish, you can do ESL. That's how I got into it many years ago, when there was no such thing as an ESL program in Missouri. And because no one thought learning English in America was an issue, that everybody spoke English. Of course, that was true in the Midwest because we didn't have to deal with change to begin with. But now that's changed because of immigration. So students are pulled out for anywhere from 15 minutes, an hour to 3 hours, and they go to a teacher who works with them one-on-one or with a very small group. You're going to go across here and see some of the shortcomings of these. You know, I don't think that's in here. That's a whole different ballgame. Okay, I'll be discussing these along the way as we look at these each week. So the pullout, it has a problem in that kids miss whatever class they're pulled out from. So if they're in, what people do generally and pull out is they take them and they go to the ESL teacher during what normally would be one of their content classes, because people say, well, they don't have much English, so they might as well leave English class and go to the ESL class because they'd be frustrated being in a regular English class. That's all can be a very detrimental thing. One of the examples I remember is a kid in 5th grade who was actually pretty fluent in English many years ago in Lex. And in 5th grade, he was pulled out of math class. So when he got to 6th grade, his English was pretty good, but he couldn't do math because he had missed a whole year of math. So that's one of the drawbacks to pull out. And so that's a whole different, I probably need this to be about 2 whole pages wide, but I'll give you some of the detrimental aspects of it, the negative. The push in is a little different. Some schools use that now. The ESL teacher actually accompanies ESL students, or ELs as we call them, English learners, accompanies them to their classes and kind of acts as a super tutor, helping out in the back or wherever they are in the classroom, working with them to help them comprehend assignments. A lot of times paras do this kind of work, but some people actually have you as an ESL teacher. This is nice to have multiple teachers in one room, but it's some of the drawbacks are you got to make sure the ESL teacher and the ELs are part of the classroom and that they work closely with the actual classroom teacher, so we don't have your students and my students, different students in the class, that whole mindset. A dual or a co-teaching situation would be ideal. Okay, as I mentioned, paraeducators are often employed. Although it's illegal to use a paraeducator as a teacher in a standalone classroom, because of budget and everything else, teachers a lot of times end up having a paraeducator functioning as a super tutor, as a translator, etc. So that is complicated to manage all this. Then the deal is who's in control of the para. Is it the classroom teacher? Is this an ESL para? Is this a general para? Does it happen to be a paraeducator that speaks the language of some of the students? I know in some schools they don't. It's not always Spanish. They need somebody who speaks a African language, or or even Native American. That's another issue. The idea of teaching English to Native Americans is a really long and sorrowful history. It goes back to the whole idea of what happened to America in the past, in the conflicts between Native Americans and the dominant culture came in and displaced them, however you want to say that. ESL class period is when you have a dedicated class period. Kids go to their regular classes, and then they go to ESL, and they have a set curriculum in ESL. I would say generally the kids in that kind of situation have some fluency in spoken English, but they're working on their writing and reading skills. Okay, so it's not just students that have no or almost no English. So it's somewhat a variation of the pullout. The good thing about it is the teacher with an ESL class period, you usually have a schedule. So you're just like a history or a chemistry or a social studies class for fourth grade or something. Only the ESL teacher has them for that period and has her own curriculum to follow along. She's not trying to just help out with other students, with other teachers. I don't particularly like it. Because if I like ESL teachers to be recognized as professionals and to have their own classroom, it really affects I think it affects, from what I've talked with teachers that are ESL teachers, the idea of not having their own classroom and their own program and their own goals and curriculum, but being kind of under another teacher, that really kind of makes them like homeless teachers. They kind of wander the halls going in to help with a push-in or being, or sometimes, and this is the world you live in when you're an ESL teacher, because you might be in a school with 3 kids that need help at different grade levels. And you're going to end up with one of those first 2 programs, not the third one. Now on the back, I'm not going to go into the last page, but on the middle page, sheltered instruction is going to be what we're talking about. I like sheltered instruction. It means you are teaching content. You can be a history teacher and either has had training or had instruction, professional development in ESL, like what we're doing now. Or you could be an ESL teacher teaching history, maybe a little bit outside your area. You're not a history teacher. Depends on what the school has. Schools can assign teachers to a certain percentage of teachers to teach outside of their certification area, because small schools have limited ability to attract teachers. They can't just whip up an extra math teacher. Okay. Now, finally, the newcomer program. This is quite different. This is when you have, particularly if you do this is very much a first-year program with kids you'll have for quite a while. In other words, they come into school. If they have a previous educational background, that's one thing. They may know how to behave. They may know how to do. They may be able to read, they just need to read in English, but because they've been reading in Spanish or whatever. But newcomer programs may involve children who have never been in school and maybe 8 or 12 years old. They have to know how to do everything in the school. They may have to teach them about trash cans, how to use the bathrooms, because they may never have had bathrooms where they're coming from. Well, we don't know. You can't assume. So I've got videos of people coming in from refugee areas where they had a school, but everything about it, the facilities, maybe a lack of electricity, the idea of turning on and turning off buttons using a microwave, they wouldn't know these things. So you almost teach some life skills like you would with children who have disabilities and have to learn life skills. You may have to teach those. So one thing about ESL, it's not just a simple curriculum that you just pick it up in a textbook. you may have to invent a lot of your curriculum. You may have to collaborate with SPED teachers on some things, with the teachers that do reading interventions. Heck, you never know. Nutrition may be an issue. Kids come in, religious restrictions on what they eat, or maybe they have physical issues due to their development, or they may, I've had students, I've seen students come in who've been exposed to having relatives, even their own brothers, murdered in front of them, and suddenly they're in a school and they're dealing with war trauma. So that you could have mental issues coming in, and cross-cultural, I mean, it's very complicated. One thing, it's not boring. It's not going to be the same thing every day. Okay, so that's my little overview. For each of these, I'm going to talk in greater detail, but I wanted you to have this as a handout. And then we do need to be looking at what the drawbacks are, what the resources are for some of these types of programs, because in this TESOL class, I'm trying to expose you to a broad area, everything from advocacy to types of programs, a little bit about placement. That's how I see this TESOL program. It's not quite the methods course Dr. Yoakum used to teach. It was very good, high quality methods course. I'm kind of using this as exposing you to a lot of this, but since we're online, I'm not going to have you teaching lessons and so forth. I realize the nature of online is somewhat limiting. Do remember that I'm available. I can have coffee with you at baristas. I do actually like to interact and talk to you. I like face-to-face classes. I generally like online for graduates. This is the first online for undergrads. And since I know a lot of you in the class, it's weird. I see you on Wednesday night and then I talk to you on here. And feel free to send me a video or come by the office, because I'm getting a little weird just sitting in front of a television or sitting in front of a computer recording myself. Okay. Well, okay, I'm going to make another video about chapter 1 and send that to you. Thank you.